Welcome. Okay, so welcome to our BioYouth call. Today we are talking about brain health. And, these monthly Zoom calls are a chance for me to just share some information, but it's also an opportunity for you to ask any questions. So I'll give some pauses here and there if you have questions, and you can simply unmute and ask them, or you can also put them in the chat and I can see your questions there. Welcome. Yeah. And in the BioYouth company and our mission is not just supplements, but also just to really look at a holistic approach to taking care of our body. I always like to say, like, to nourish our best asset, which is us. And the more we, take care of ourselves with what we eat and how we move and our sleep and our self-care, it really adds up to a big picture. And I am a nutrition consultant and board certified in holistic nutrition. And I've been doing this for about 15 years. And I just love all things nutrition and health, and try to do the best I can to nourish my best asset. But it's not really about perfection, because that's a hard one to achieve. It's just also really about being consistent. I like to sometimes say it's like 80-20, 80% of the time we're, eating really well and taking care of ourselves and getting good sleep, prioritizing the things that are going to care for us. And sometimes we, play in the 20%, right? And that's often maybe how we can live, until sometimes if we have a health challenge or a condition, then we step into, maybe we try to be 100%, right? And so the goal is just to be able to support the body the best that we can and empower ourselves, because it's not just about, what our doctors say. It's really like stepping up and saying, well, what I eat makes a difference. Prioritizing these other things makes a difference in how I feel. And we all know that, because we all know when we feel bad, and we can usually see why we feel bad, because of maybe what we ate or drank or stayed up too late or whatever it is. So today's topic is really an important one, and it's one that I really have been learning a lot more about, studying with a couple different doctors that are experts in Alzheimer's and things like that, because it really does, like everything we do in our life, if we are lucky enough to live to be older, we want to make sure we have our cognition. And so it does kind of boil down to that ability to care for and have, our memory and our mood. Those are both important, and to feel good and to be able to engage and, be active even in our mind. So it's been something I've been studying a lot more in the last few years, because it just really does come down to that, right? Come down to our cognition and feeling good in our body. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about brain health, and then, of course, take your questions at some point. And, to talk about, one of the ways I think it's really important to talk about our brain health is through the lens of our gut-brain connection. So we have our brain, and we also have our nervous tissue. And when we are embryos, and we are developing, one of the things that happens is the embryo kind of comes open like this, and the nervous tissue of the gut is connected to the nervous tissue of the brain. So it's really is an extension. The gut is an extension of the brain, or maybe the brain is an extension of the gut, depends who you ask. And that extension is really that gut-brain connection. And what connects them really is the vagus nerve. It's one of our 12 cranial nerves. And our cranial nerves are nerves that are located kind of in the cranium, and they help us with basically survival. It's like, oh, I have to look, to see if there's food or danger. I have to smell. I can smell food to see if it's good or bad still. Or maybe it doesn't smell good. It's old. It's got bacteria. I don't want to eat it. Or maybe I want to smell if there's smoke or something that I need to take action with. It's our ability to taste, to swallow. So it's all of our senses basically that are kind of keeping us alive and safe in ourselves, like what we can see and react to. And then we have the one that wanders down, and that vagus nerve helps with our autonomic nervous system. So it's the things that we need for survival that we don't really think about, like our breathing and our heartbeat and our digestive mobility, peristalsis of everything moving along. So that gut-brain connection is really important for basically our cognition, and something that's connected to that entire nervous tissue is our microbiome. It's all the bacteria that are lining our gut that are helping us to digest. The bacteria sort of take root in our GI tract when we're born, and it's so used to being there, it just takes up root. It's like, okay, now here's a new body to live in and to thrive in, and we have work to do. We're going to help this body digest its food. We're going to help this body to break down, things. We're also going to help this body to educate the immune system. We're going to educate the immune system so that it is, has a good, strong immune system. So all of this is really connected, right? And really helping us to thrive. So that microbiome, like not only do we have our nervous tissue lining our gut, our microbiome lining our gut, and a little fun fact, our microbiome, the bacteria in our body, weighs as much as our brain. So it's like they're both about 3.5 pounds, which is kind of interesting. And then we have our immune system, which also lines our gut. So this whole gut area is really impactful to the brain. And often if there is issues in our cognition, with our brain, we kind of have to look at three pieces. We have to look at inflammation, because inflammation can totally affect how our brain functions. And we have to do what we can to lower that. We also need to look at our hormonal system, which the master glands of our entire hormonal system is in the brain. And we also have to look at our stress levels, because that can all impact that gut-brain connection. So it becomes really important. And, the thing too, I think that we've learned so much of lately in the last few years is the difference between like our genetics and our epigenetics. So we can actually now identify certain genes that might give us a higher risk towards Alzheimer's, let's just say that. So there's a gene called APOE4, and we actually have like APOE4, APOE3, APOE2, APOE1. And we have 2 of those genes. And people that have 4s in their 2 sets of genes, either 2 sets of 4 or a 4 and a 3, are at a much higher risk. Now, not everybody knows what their APOE4 gene is, because you have to get it tested. It's a genetic test. It is found in some of those genetic tests you can get online, like the, like the 23andMe and things like that. But even if you don't know, we still all want to make sure we take care of that. If you see that there's Alzheimer's in your family lineage, chances are there's more of that APOE4. But the thing about our genetics, though, I will say, is there's genetics and there's epigenetics. And genetics means like, oh, everyone in my family has this, I'm probably going to get it. But our epigenetics is like, well, if everybody in my family has this, what can I do differently to not have that happen to me? And that's where we can start making our own personal choices to have a different outcome. Just because somebody in your family has diabetes or high cholesterol or Alzheimer's does not necessarily guarantee that you're going to have that. Because yes, you have those genetics, but the lifestyle you lead is going to turn those genetics on or off, right? So it doesn't really make a difference. So there's a lot of ways we can look at brain degeneration. There's things like inflammation, oxidative stress. There's excitotoxicity, which is maybe like eating a lot of preservatives and chemicals in our foods that can kind of create brain stuff happening. There's heavy metals, right? There's a lot of toxins in our environment. There's mitochondrial dysfunction. Sometimes our mitochondria doesn't work. There's our genetics, our epigenetics, like I just talked about, our microbiome, and basically just the nutrients that we, eat or don't eat. Like maybe we don't have enough nutrients to feed the brain. Maybe we have too much of something. So there's kind of a play when it comes to that. So when it comes to, let me just talk a little bit, like when it comes to digestive health in general, it's definitely like we want to think about, okay, digestion actually is regulated and starts in the brain. So, because again, we might smell the food, we might see food, our brain registers that our blood sugar is low, so it might get our stomach juices going. So I guess the first thing I just want to say when it comes to optimal brain health is, and just optimal digestion, optimizing that gut-brain connection is mindfulness and mindful eating, right? Sometimes, and I can get into this, sometimes I might be so busy, I might be eating really good food, but like I'm driving in my car eating it, or something like that, where I'm really not paying attention to what I'm doing, or I might be watching something or still on my computer, right? Like that is not kind of giving the brain and the connection there to like getting everything going. And we have a lot of juices and enzymes and acids that need to be excreted to make sure that we get the most out of our digestive process. So if we're just sort of like, in another planet while we're eating food, we tend to not chew our food well enough. We might not excrete enough juices because our system is not really prepared for it. And we might overeat, we might just eat too much. So there's all these things that like our digestion is not going to be optimized. And we really want to optimize that connection there, right? And really like when we can get the vagus nerve kind of up and going, and we can get into that more calm parasympathetic nervous system, that really optimizes our digestion. So one of the things that I like to do before a meal is to take a few deep breaths and make sure that my exhale is longer than my inhale. And that really helps to calm my nervous system, get me into what we call the parasympathetic, or I like to call it the rest and digest mode. And that is going to really help to optimize digestion. Okay, let me see what I want to say next. Okay, and then I'm just going to ask to the people that are here, does anybody have a question or anything or a comment from what I've said so far? You're more than welcome to ask any question that you might have in relation to what I'm talking about. Okay, I'll keep going. So the next thing that I want to talk a little bit about is, other things that can certainly affect the brain. And one of them is, when we're eating foods that have things like preservatives and colors and additives and, artificial sweeteners. One of the names that some of those things have are, they're called excitotoxins. And this is why if you, one of the things, for example, children that have autism or are even on the spectrum often find that their parents find that if they get them off of preservatives, like colorings and artificial flavors and, all kinds of things, that they are much like calmer and better able to kind of handle the world and be in the world than when they're having those things. And what they found is a lot of those chemicals, they actually, they look similar to amino acids and they can cross the blood-brain barrier, and they're considered excitotoxins. So they excite our brain cells to death is what an excitotoxin means. And so it can be really damaging to the brain. And this is something that we want to, really pay attention to. And, I have an interesting personal story on this. I remember when my daughter, who's 21 now, she was like probably 5 or 6 or something. And I was kind of, a budding nutritionist. And we were at the market and she wanted to get some corn nuts. And like, I grew up having corn nuts. So she's like, Mama, of course, she gave me her little sob story. You never let me eat food like this. Can I please have some corn nuts? And I was like, yeah, sure, you can get some corn nuts, So she gets the corn nuts. I didn't read the label or anything. And we get home and she eats the corn nuts. And she was really hyperactive. And she wasn't a very hyperactive child, but I was like, whoa, like this girl is bouncing off the walls. And it was very apparent. It was very different than her normal. And so then my husband came home and he started eating some corn nuts and he got an instant headache. And I was like, huh. So then I looked at the label and I knew he sometimes would get headaches from MSG. So I said, oh, this has MSG in it. And he's like, oh yeah, that definitely gives me a headache. Well, I know that MSG as an additive can give people headaches and can also cause hyperactivity in children. So that's when I said, okay, you're not allowed to have anything with MSG and you're not allowed to have anything with MSG. And it was really clear. I mean, I could see it with my own eyes, how both of them reacted to that. And I could see like almost like the genetics of how he processed it and how she processed it. And so it was very clear. And so, so sometimes parents or people will notice when I eat these things, maybe it causes me hyperactivity, maybe it causes me a headache, maybe it gives me brain fog. So sometimes it's those foods that we might notice. And I will say what's kind of funny is my initials are MSG. So I'm the only MSG that's good for their diet, not that other stuff. So one of the things I want to just talk a little bit about gut health in general as well. Okay. So one of the things about gut health in general and just our microbiome is we have 2 main families of our microbiome that are living in our gut. And when we eat food, we break down the food and there's a lot of byproducts from the microbiome. And one of the things that they make are something called short chain fatty acids. And that becomes fuel for our intestinal walls. And we also the gut also makes some the microbiome also makes some neurotransmitters, which help us to feel good, like things like serotonin or things like GABA, which both act to just really make us feel good, content, satisfied, relaxed, lowers our cravings. But if we don't have the right amount if we're not feeding our microbiome properly, then we might have more like not feeling good, right? We might have more anxiety. We might even have depression. So part of that gut-brain connection is making sure we are feeding our microbiome, the bacteria in our gut, lots of fiber. That comes from greens and vegetables and beans and grains if you eat them, and fruit, right? That comes from plant foods. The more plant-based, doesn't mean you have to be completely plant-based, but the more plant-based you are, the more you have half to 3/4 of your plate full of vegetables, the more you're going to be feeding your microbiome. Not so much like when you're eating like a whole grain bread, that's kind of false marketing. You want to have whole and complex foods. It's fine if you're going to eat the whole grain bread, but don't think of that as like the same kind of food as just whole, unprocessed fruits and vegetables, grains and beans. That's where you're going to get the true microbiome food. And the other thing is that there are some microbiome products that if you are, if you have a leaky gut and if they get out, they might cause more depression. What's really interesting is years ago, like in the 50s, they used to study like when people were depressed, they would see there was more inflammation in the blood in depressed people. And what they discovered is a lot of those inflammatory molecules are coming from the gut, things that are not supposed to get out. And that was causing depression. And it still does. So one of the first things we have to do is what I like to say is like heal and seal the gut. So if somebody has leaky gut and things are getting out of there that shouldn't be, that's not good. So it's kind of like your plumbing, your kitchen sink. When you have, a leak in your kitchen sink plumbing under the sink or in the wall, then you're going to start getting mold and it's not good. You got to fix it. Same thing with our gut. Our gut is like plumbing. We only let things out that are like minuscule and ready to come out. So we don't want to have more, we don't want to let things out. So what I recommend is avoiding more processed foods, eating a more simple diet, even like more soups and stews and things like that to help heal and seal the gut. Sometimes we need to do elimination diet. We need to get rid of the food culprits, like gluten is a big one. Gluten and depression are very linked as well. So, and I just want to say, like, as far as our mood goes, one of those neurotransmitters that we make a lot of in the gut, which is serotonin, we make some in the brain. How could we naturally boost that neurotransmitters? One of them is to, again, eat more prebiotic, which is more fiber, and even probiotic foods, like, things like maybe sauerkraut or pickles or olives or yogurts and things like that. Or maybe we take a probiotic. Get outside and get morning light first thing in the morning. I love to go out with, like, whether it's my water or my coffee or my tea, and go outside the first, my first sip, and just let all my senses, notice the day, get some fresh air, get some sunlight in my eyes. Exercising in the morning can help boost serotonin. Making sure we have proteins and fats earlier in the day, like making sure we have complete meals. We're not just having like a piece of toast. We want to make sure, what's my protein? What's my fat? Where are my veggies? Right. And sometimes even having a good savory snack in the afternoon, like olives and nuts and seeds and other kinds of proteins, really helps boost our serotonin and also helps with sugar cravings. Because most people in the afternoon, they're like, give me something maybe salty, crunchy like chips, or give me some chocolate, right? A lot of people have that. All right, let me see real fast what else I want to say and see if there's any other questions that anybody has. Okay. And you can always put them in the chat too. So the other thing I want to talk about that's really important for protecting our brain, and I know it can be hard to come by, it's something I personally struggle with, but is sleep. Sleep is extremely protective to the brain. When we sleep, what happens is sleep expands the extracellular space in the brain, allowing calcium and magnesium ions to flow through, kind of like a tide. So it's almost like a high tide in the brain. And so it alters the extracellular anatomy of the brain, and it reduces amyloid plaques. And then the brain is able to drain. So throughout our entire body, we have something called our lymphatic system, and that is like our waterways, right? We're as watery as planet Earth. When you hear that thing where they say, oh, the water or the Earth is 70% water, so is our body. Isn't that amazing? So at night, so we have our lymphatic through our whole body. We actually have 3 times as much lymph as we do blood. So we have a lot of watery flow that's like cleaning things up. It's where our immune system channels. But in the brain, it's called the glymphatic system. So at night, it expands up and allows everything to drain. But it really just does this when we're sleeping. So sleep is really important to make sure we prioritize. And again, I know it can be hard. So sometimes it's hard, like, what can we do differently, right? And I like to kind of categorize this into 2 things. One is like our sleep hygiene. And then the other one is maybe the heavier hitters like nutrients and supplements and things like that. But the thing we have to remember is the eyes, they really are the window to the brain. So, we have to at this stage for a lot of people is we have to turn off our electronics. We have to stop getting so much blue light, Or you could, wear yellow tinted glasses at night if you're like going to stay on a screen and watch things, which is something that I do sometimes when I want to read my Kindle. I'll put on my blue light glasses, blue blocking glasses. They're just yellow glasses you can get like at the hardware store or online easily. And it kind of blocks out the blue lights, and it just helps calm the brain. So getting off of screens earlier, reading a book is good. Not eating too close to dinner, not eating sugar, too close to dinner. The other night I had a little chocolate after dinner, and I mean, I really didn't even have that much, and I did not sleep good. So I was like, oh, why I had to learn that lesson again. Sometimes that happens, right? Where we're like, okay. But, something that's excreted by our pineal gland is melatonin. And so again, in melatonin, we're not going to release as much melatonin if we are surrounded by lots of light. So we want to turn the lights down. We want to make sure our bedroom is our sanctuary. We don't want to catch that second wind. We want to try to get to bed earlier, right? Does that happen to you? Like where you're kind of tired, but you stay up a little bit longer. And then next thing you know, you have the second wind and it's really hard to fall asleep, right? That's one of the reasons I'm like, usually like, okay, I need to get to bed by a certain time because that second wind kind of is not good for me personally. Okay, so the other thing, so sleep we know is important. And BioYouth does have a really nice sleep supplement that has actually really helped me a lot as well. So, we have to do what we have to do to get a good night's sleep. Sometimes we have to maybe like kick the animals out of the bedroom, those night owl cats, I'll tell you. But the other thing I want to talk about when it comes to brain health is exercise. And I was just, as I mentioned, I'm taking a class right now, and I was just reading or listening to one of the lectures, and they were talking about, they were doing a case study of two different women. And one woman, she did have the genes for Alzheimer's, and the other woman didn't. But one woman, the woman who did not, she was facing lots of cognitive decline. And often, in the way that some of the cutting edge doctors are dealing with Alzheimer's is kind of saying, when it comes to brain health, is saying, all right, here's the example that this doctor gives. He says, your roof has 37 holes. And your roofer comes over and the roofer says, well, I'm just going to patch one of them. And you're like, well, wait, there's 37. So the current model in Western medicine is a medication might just patch one hole. So if that's your reason why, it might work for you. But if you've got 36 other holes, or maybe you have 15 holes or 5 holes, and they're not getting patched, you're still going to have a leaky roof. So you're still going to be at risk. You're still going to be maybe in a cognitive spiral downward. Whereas some of the cutting edge doctors say, well, let's make sure you're doing, let's make sure you're not inflamed. Let's make sure you're balancing your blood sugar. Let's make sure you're sleeping through the night. Let's make sure, like your homocysteine is low. So all of a sudden we're looking at all these different things and we're saying, oh, we're patching up holes. And sometimes, you do one thing and you patch up 5 holes, and you do another thing and you patch up 7. That's kind of the amazing thing. Sometimes people like exercising or, drinking more water or eating more protein, right? Or eating less sugar or eating more vegetables. We do one thing and everything starts to feel better. And that's the goal. Yeah, we want to lose weight or we want to lower our numbers, but ultimately we want to feel good. And that is like the secret sauce, right? At least I think that's the secret sauce to feeling good. So exercise. So back to my little story. Sorry, I kind of segued. Back to my story was that these two women, one did not have the genes and one did. The one and the doctor said, she didn't have any cognition issues, but one of the things she did every day was exercise. Every day she walked something like 3 or 4 miles every day. The other one, well, once in a while. So once she made some changes and started exercising more, things started to shift for her. So exercise is really one of those important pieces of the puzzle. And what I tend to recommend is to do it earlier in the day, because there's always going to be excuses later in the day. Oh, well, I just need to do this, or I don't have time. For me, if I wake up and exercise, then if I do something again later in the day, it's like a bonus round, right? And then I'm like, oh, I did a workout this morning and I went for a nice walk with my dog later. Woohoo. So it's a good thing to make sure that you schedule it into your day and, have fun with it. If walking is something you like to do, like see if you could do it with a neighbor or a friend. I have one client who walks with a friend and that's kind of a neighbor, and they walk almost every day pretty early, and they're really good about doing it. And she's like, well, we're not really friends outside of our walking every day, but that's what gets us walking every day is we just do it. So, sometimes that could be a really great way to go. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about in my talk today is a really important topic when it comes to brain health, and it's on the fats that we eat. Okay, so let me just back up for a second. We talked about the importance of the microbiome and mindful eating, and then we talked about importance of sleep and exercise, and we might have talked about something else, but and inflammation and healing the gut, right? And so now I want to talk about fats. So it's really interesting because, let's see. First of all, we have so much access to any kind of food, like anytime, anywhere, right? I always say I just remember the first time I went to Hawaii and I was like, well, it's kind of weird. It's like, any grocery store USA, it's like at one of the grocery stores, like the mangoes and the bananas weren't even from Hawaii. They were from Mexico or something. And I was like, hey, this is weird. You can get anything, anywhere, anytime. So that makes it challenging for us, I think, because then we kind of give into our cravings and we can have anything, anywhere, anytime. Now, the thing that happens with that, not so much with the fruit, but with processed foods are, they are very specific when it comes to the fats and oils they use. Now, a lot of the fats and oils in processed foods are the cheap ones, the ones that are cheap to make the food cheap and to make the food be shelf stable so they can make it and it can last for 6 months. It's not like some lettuce in the market. They need to make sure that lettuce is purchased quick or they're going to lose out, right? But processed foods have a longer shelf life. And a big reason why they could make it have a longer shelf life, in addition to preservatives, is because of the fats that they're using. So there's different kinds of fats. There's saturated fats, right? The ones that are solid at room temperature, like butter and ghee and coconut and animal fats. And then there's also monounsaturated fats like olive oil and avocados and avocado oil. And then there's polyunsaturated fats, which are like our omega-6s and omega-3s. And we call those essential fatty acids because we do need some and we need to get them from our food. We can actually make a little saturated. We can kind of those are not as essential as omega-6 and omega-3. Now, some people, if they have that APOE4 gene, their cholesterol is going to go up quick if they eat a lot of saturated fats. So people that have that gene or high cholesterol doesn't mean you can't have any saturated fats, but you should emphasize the olive oil and avocados and nuts and seeds and things like that, more so than butter and fatty meats and things like that. Okay. And coconut oil. So the other piece is that, so every single cell in our body, every single cell has a cell membrane, wraps around the cell. It's like it holds the cell together, and fat is what holds the cell, keeps it kind of intact, because fat is kind of like hydrophobic, right? It doesn't really mix well with water. Just like when you make a salad dressing, it's the fat and the vinegar are going to separate. So every single cell has a cell membrane made of fat, and it has some cholesterol in the cell membrane too. Now, our essential fatty acids, omega-6s and omega-3s, they kind of, once we break them down, they kind of act like hormones. And omega-6s are sort of a little inflammatory, and omega-3s are a little anti-inflammatory. Now, what happens is omega-6s, we need a little inflammation. Like if I cut my pinky, I need a little inflammation it gets swelled, it gets a little hot. I have an immune response, and that's part of the healing process. Then it kind of goes away. But if there's too much inflammation just because of the foods that I'm eating, over time, there could be an inflammatory cascade, and I can't turn that off. And if my cells are inflamed, then it's going to be hard for, just think of this like inflamed cell with like not the right fats. It's going to be hard for nutrients to come into the cell, to feed the cell. It's going to be hard for waste products to leave the cell. So it becomes really kind of like an unhealthy situation on a cellular level. Even like thinking about our brains are 60% fat, right? So we don't want that ratio to be off. Now, here's the thing. What our ancestors ate and what science recommends is that for our omega-6 to omega-3, we have a 3-to-1, 3 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. That's ideal ratio. If we lived in like Antarctica or somewhere freezing up, really cold, we might want more than 1-to-1, but most of us, it's like 3-to-1. The standard American diet, because of the processed foods, makes it so that we have 20-to-1. So we have a lot more inflammatory molecules flooding the tissues, making us more inflamed on a cellular level. And that is not good for this. So our fats are very important. So I want to kind of explain what I mean by that. Is that we want to make sure that we are having, so what happens is, like when we are eating more like chips and crackers and tortillas and maybe grain-fed meats and, grain-fed dairy products and all that, we're going to have a lot of omega-6. So my best advice to us is to watch out for hidden oils like corn, soy, safflower, canola. Let's see what else. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just gonna, cottonseed, things like Crisco, margarine, even peanut oil. So all the stuff that's going to be in packaged foods, or even like in our salad dressings that we don't make ourselves. Those are the oils that are going to be in there, and those are inflammatory and they're highly processed. And so we want to try to avoid those as much as we can. And we want to prioritize, olive oil and avocados and nuts and seeds. So eat the nuts and seeds, not their oils, as much as we can. And, like flax and chia and hemp seeds. And, if you do eat meat, eating like pastured animals, like grass-fed, pasture-raised eggs, cold water fish, and then butter, ghee, coconut oil, like whole food fats versus all those refined seed oils. That is probably another one of the most important things that we can do, is really look at like what we're eating, day to day. So it's like, if you made kind of like an oil change, maybe you make your own salad dressing, maybe you make your own hummus, or check the labels. If they're using canola oil and you can find one that uses olive oil, that's gonna be much better, right? So all of that makes a big difference in our brain health, because our brain is very fatty and very susceptible to inflammation. So we want our diet to be reflective of what we want, right? We want to see a colorful plate of food. We got to put on our sunglasses because there's so much, whatchamacallit, there's so much like rainbow of colors of foods. Maybe there's some green avocado and, and greens and red peppers and all kinds of stuff that's going to give us some good, yummy stuff. And the other thing I want to just say is, so eating herbs and spices is also really, really good for our brain. And even coffee can be good for the brain. So it doesn't mean that coffee is a bad thing. I know a lot of people get nervous about their coffee, but eat nuts, herbs, and spices really support the microbiome, and they're really nutrient dense, and they stimulate digestion, and they're anti-inflammatory. So we just want to have a good variety of food in general, and that's all very brain supportive. Okay, so I'm going to pause it, and I know I don't know if either of you that are here have any questions, but I'm just going to open it up for a question or comment, and also if you want, you can write it in the chat too, either way, but I'd love to hear from you. Don't be shy. Or anything you learned today that you want to try and add. Okay, well, I hope this is helpful. And I hope that, and also if there's anything else you'd like to learn about in a future Zoom, you can post that in the chat or send an email. But I hope that it's helpful to, join me on these calls and learn more about how our bodies work and how we can support ourselves, right? So it's the reminder that like a supplement is a supplement to everything else. So we want to really step into our health goals with a full body approach so that we can feel vibrant and live our best lives. So that's the goal here. And oh, thank you, Judy. I'm so glad. It was nice to talk to you at the beginning. And I just want to say thank you for joining me, and we'll have another one next month. So stay tuned for the emails that will alert you to that. And you can always add it to your calendar. And yeah, thanks again for joining, and I'll see you next month. All right, take care.